The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
There are times in our lives when the certainties we've lived by have suddenly been swept away, and we're in the frightening situation of having to reevaluate everything we thought we knew. It might be during times when someone close to us has died. It might be during the discovery of an illness, of the loss of a job, a relationship, a home. Collectively, we're living through such a time, with the world seemingly unable to prevent civil wars and conflicts between nations, a time when the effects of climate change are daily becoming more apparent, and the plight of so many homeless and starving people in the world gets ever more desperate. At such times, our deepest need is for comfort, for reassurance, for certainty, and for hope. We need something to calm the soul. Psalm 23 was written as a song. It's generally agreed to have been written by King David. Perhaps he wrote it as a child when he was out on the hills looking after his sheep, watching for predators such as lions and bears. Most probably, it was written much later when David was king, written at a dark moment of his life, when he was surrounded by problems and might well have been mourning the death of his beloved son, Absalom. It's the best known and best loved psalm in the world, and for around 3,000 years it's touched people, those with and without a faith. One of the reasons, I think, is because it resonates throughout with a belief and trust in a real, personal, loving God, who's with us throughout our lives and beyond, who provides for all our needs, who watches over us, protects us and cares for us, who, as David puts it, gently leads us back to green pastures when we've gone astray, leads us to places where we can find rest. Even in the worst of times, when we're surrounded by enemies, when we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, God is a constant. In times of happiness and in times of despair, God is with each one of us. And at the last, God's care, his goodness and mercy are with us forever. So what do we know of the man who composed it? I've just been reading a fascinating book, a novel called The Secret Chord by Geraldine Brooks. It's written in the words of the prophet Nathan. In the afterword, Geraldine Brooks writes, David is the first man in literature whose story is told in detail from early childhood to extreme old age. Some scholars have called this biography the oldest piece of history writing by at least half a millennium. Outside of the pages of the Bible, however, David has left little trace. A single engraving uncovered at Tel Dan mentions his house, and some buildings of the Second Iron Age period might have been associated with a leader of his stature. But she goes on to say that David must have actually existed, for no people would invent such a flawed figure for a national hero. And flawed David certainly was. He was a man of dazzling contradictions. a shepherd boy who defeated the giant Goliath with nothing more than a sling and a stone, a successful war leader who became king, a sensuous man who treacherously had his chief put to death in order to cover up his rape of Bathsheba, who he then married, a poet, a musician, a singer, all these things in one flawed human being. But above and beyond all these contradictions was his total belief in the Lord. Yes, he fell into sin many, many times, but the guiding light of his life was his overwhelming love for God. He's a towering figure in the Old Testament. His life is written about extensively in books 1 and 2 of Samuel and 1 Kings. He was considered the epitome of kingship, someone who united the many disparate tribes into a nation under one God. At the time of Jesus, the people of Israel were looking for a second David as their Messiah. We can all learn from David. We're all flawed. We're all a mass of contradictions. We all have strengths and weaknesses, and the desire to follow Jesus is so often at odds with our doubts and fears. We want to do good, but we so often do evil. We can all learn from David, learn to trust God, to lean on him, to have him as our guiding light, our beacon of hope. But perhaps the greatest legacy we have of David is not that of him as a great war leader or great king. It's in his words and music, which, like the 23rd Psalm, have spoken to people throughout the ages. For Jews, it's sung weekly and recited to the dying. It's provided comfort and hope in some of the darkest situations. Its words are filled with trust in God's everlasting love and protection. It's spoken to people then, and it speaks to us now. Amen.